Our legend continues. Welcome back to the Sanders Report. I'm Greg, and if you're enjoying the content we're producing, please consider following that link in the description below, patreon.com/SandersPresents, and join us for this mythical journey on our Patreon and sponsor the content we're producing. We currently have two tiers available, a $3 tier and a $5 tier. At that $5 tier, you truly become legend, and your name is carved into the mythical Nernstone at the base of our tower. I want to thank my patrons so much for sponsoring this content. I truly do appreciate it. Also, available at that $5 tier are comics that I hope you're enjoying as well. Now, with that, let us begin. This is Final Fantasy VII, the review, the story. Final Fantasy VII follows the story of mercenary Cloud Strife, who is hired by the eco-terrorist group Avalanche, led by Barrett Wallace, to help fight the mega corporation, the Shinra Electric Power Company, who attempts to drain the planet's lifeblood as an energy source to further their profits. Apathetic to the cause, Cloud initially fights for personal gain and for the promise he made to childhood friend Tifa Lockhart. Cloud eventually joins forces with many others to save the planet, which is threatened by Shinra and Cloud's nemesis, Sephiroth, and discovers a reason to fight for a cause other than his own. Now, this energy manufacturing mega company that is Shinra is harvesting the sheer life energy of the planet. That's known as the life stream as a simple fossil fuel. The life stream is processed and made into products ranging from electricity and heat to Mako and materia. The latter two materials can work miracles, granting the wisdom of the ancients to the user. However, the life stream, like most other fuels, is finite in supply, and the planet's life force is being malevolently drained by the constant exploitation of Mako by Shinra. Though aware of the harmful effects, they function without remorse. However, the real battle lies not with a corporation, but a force much more competent from the distant past. A long-thought dead warrior bent on becoming a god by draining all of the life stream from the planet has risen again and will stop at nothing to achieve his goal. Now a small rebel group emanating from the slums must quell the various dangers toward the innocent, and one mercenary for hire must look amidst the lies and deceptions and find the man he is within. So, the planet is Gaia, and it is referred to simply as the planet by its inhabitants. And Gaia has three main continents. The planet is a living organism, and its lifeblood is that life stream, the liquid form being Mako that wells in the substrata. Above the surface, Mako crystallizes into materia that allows its users to manipulate the powers of the planet in a phenomenon many call magic. Harvesting Mako as an energy source drains the planet of its life and corrupts life forms, creating monsters in the wild. The planet was once home to the ancients, who called themselves the Cetra. The Cetra traveled the planet, cultivating life wherever they went, and were said to be able to enter communion with the planet itself. At the end of their journey, legends tell, the Cetra entered the Promised Land, a place of supreme happiness. The dominant faction of the world, the Shinra Electric Power Company, is a powerful corporation that harvests that Mako as an energy source. Now, Shinra is seen as responsible for raising the quality of life for everyone in its sphere of influence. It has its own army, its special force being the soldier, and is present in most parts of the planet. Shinra is opposed by that small terrorist organization known as Avalanche, who seeks to stop Shinra from killing the planet by draining the life stream. Shinra's base of operations is the metropolis of Midgar, ringed by 8 Mako reactors that drain Mako for energy. While the upper city is an industrial powerhouse with a generally high quality of life, the lower city is made up of slums and receives little light, and its air is polluted. The harvesting of Mako energy has made the area around Midgar a barren wasteland, inhabited by monsters where flowers rarely grow. So the main characters throughout Final Fantasy VII, the ones that you can't avoid, are Cloud Strife, Barrett Wallace, Tifa Lockhart, Aerith Gainsborough, or Eris in the original PS1 release of Final Fantasy VII due to a translation error, Red 13, Kate Sith, and Sid Highwind. And 2 optional characters are Yuffie Kizaragi and Vincent Valentine. And of course, the main antagonist, Sephiroth and Jenova. Now, what's interesting here, looking at the story of Final Fantasy VII, we obviously have to wrap right back around to that cultural impact and that narrative drive and the thrust of the story that I'm certain we're all aware of. I'm certain, many of us, whether it's through pop culture, through gags, or just through the internet, the most watching will probably know and understand the story. But on the off chance you don't, it is my greatest desire to keep the main plot points or the central plot points or central twists as hidden as possible. So I'm not going to really dive into those specifically here for the sake of this analysis and review, so as to not ruin your experience if you have managed to avoid those significant spoilers. And overall, the story of Final Fantasy VII is an incredibly powerful one, dealing with depression, duality, a loss of innocence, a loss of identity, and an overwhelming drive of discovering your place in the world, what that means for the world, and themes of life and death. These are all powerful themes that are explored with an amazing amount of depth in terms of adult themes, especially when compared to the previous 6 Final Fantasies. And that change is, at least in my opinion, because again, going back to 1997, playing this, it was apparent, playing Final Fantasy VII and going back and experiencing the others, when you notice that 1 through 6 were restricted by the censorship that Nintendo mandated. So again, when Squaresoft made that jump to the PlayStation and made that partnership with Sony, far more changed than just the graphical fidelity or the beauty of it visually. We also had a massive change in a narrative drive. One that led to a far more profound story in terms of what Square wanted to explore, I guess, is the best way of looking at it, or at least the way that I look at it now and looked at it then, having played Final Fantasy VII first to completion and then went back to the others. Now, this story is spread across 3 discs, and throughout there is a strong drive and a strong narrative push. And again, this is just me. This is just my opinion. But only at small moments does it feel like the pace drags. There are definitely subplots and character exploration that really does drive the main narrative to a halt. It really does kill the pace instantly. But I'm willing to accept that. I'm very okay with that because I don't notice it in terms of gameplay and in terms of the narrative and in terms of the thrust of the story. I like the exploration. I like the sidetracking. I like the moments where it slows down and where it stops and where it has opportunity to breathe and where you get to really become involved in each character's story and each character's identity and in the troubles and in what they've experienced. It's very, very powerful. So while yes, on a very, very basic level, there are moments, especially after the events in Calm, again, just staying as vague as possible, where you do feel like it has really grinded to a halt. But again, I have to reiterate, the exploration of character makes it so worth it. Now, in terms of looking at 1997, in terms of looking at this perspective, obviously translations and narrative structure have come a long way in those 25 years. And one of the biggest things that have to be pointed out is the translation. Final Fantasy VII does suffer in terms of translation. There are really there are moments that are weaker due to poor translations and slip ups, but overall, overwhelmingly, in my opinion, it does not hurt the story. There is a charm to it, and again, that might be nostalgia. I freely admit that there could easily be a bias there in terms of accepting the poor work of the translation. I played and experienced the story of Final Fantasy VII when I was from 8 to 9 years old. I had it was a very profound, very powerful experience in terms of gaming and in terms of shaping a big chunk of pop culture. Absolutely. And so I think 100% we can judge something critically and we can be fair, but we also have to look at it in the time it was released, in the way it was released, and have the respect for it and have the forethought to go, they were working in a very different time. And given what they were working within, what they were coming off of in terms of censorship from Nintendo, in terms of jumping in a massive, massive jump of graphics, again, in my opinion, based off what we were playing back in the day to what they pulled off suddenly, is truly incredible. And it's all powered by the story, because nothing else would matter without the story. It's all so brilliantly and beautifully woven together, from the use of the materia, the Mako, the terrorism of Avalanche, which honestly was really brilliant. Yes, they're a group of rebels, and yes, it plays to the same old themes in terms of the monomyth and the hero's journey, and again, going back to even Star Wars comparisons and that really, really basic, simplified approach of this rebel group. Because it's no different than, you have Luke Skywalker destroying the Death Star. There was obviously innocent people there. You have Barrett Wallace leading, this rebel group, this terrorist group, to destroy a Mako reactor. Innocent citizens and civilians, people die. And there is a weight to that. And you as a player have to explore those themes. And again, it goes back to those themes of life and death. It goes back to the themes of power and authority and weakness and what we take versus what we give. And it's so beautifully, beautifully done, especially even looking at it now, given the limitations that they were working with. Because again, in terms of the story, it has beautiful FMVs. It has a wonderful exploration of all of these themes. There is no voice acting here. It is all translated text that you read and immerse yourself in. And you give these characters all very distinct voices and personality, which I think leads to another level of immersion. Because again, as I have reiterated and as I want to remind, it's difficult to just judge Final Fantasy VII without acknowledging what it's done for me, or what effect it had on the world, what effect it had on games everywhere. That's always going to be there. You can't take that away. You can't take that effect away. And you also can't take away the massive leaps that games have made in the 25 years since Final Fantasy VII released. So there is absolutely a perspective of giving these characters voices, adding to the immersion of it, but also the really, really brilliant execution. And it's so difficult because to want to talk about things so specifically and then also trying to maintain a vague approach as possible, because in as unlikely as it is, someone watching, may not have experienced this story. You may not have an awareness of what happens in terms of spoilers, in terms of plot twists, in terms of a character's arc. And I think that is while slim, I think there's always a possibility of that. So I always want to try to judge it that way. But I still think that the approach to this story, in a way to talk about it without diving in and talking about it too much, is that it handles its themes with the maturity and with the sophistication that was unrivaled at the time. There was no comparison. It stood above the rest. it is truly, truly iconic as far as I am concerned. It is one of the most iconic storylines in not, you know what, not even just in Final Fantasy, but in gaming, with a cast of characters that are so distinct, so well thought out, so brilliantly cultivated, with strong personalities, amazing gimmicks. And each is lovable in their own way, right down to the optional characters, which you might think there's no way that these optional characters can have the depth that can be approached with that kind of depth, given you can miss them. But it's not true. They have an amazing amount of depth. Their subplots and their side stories are just as engaging, and they are completely optional. Now, obviously, 25 years later, I'm sure so many people know how to get those other two characters, that know how to unlock them, where it's not even, which honestly, they're not even considered optional anymore. They are always heavily promoted in terms of marketing material. Yuffie and Vincent are right at the front lines. And that's what I mean with looking back 25 years, judging this, judging a game and judging a property with how it's marketed now, with how it's taken over pop culture now, and with how Square now approaches selling this franchise, if you will. Optional character probably really doesn't mean anything in a modern context. But 25 years ago, it was a big deal. And that's what I mean. It was a big deal 25 years ago. So you have to look at it through the lens of history. You can't judge this by the comparisons of what the franchise is now, or what the Final Fantasy franchise is now, or the compilation is now. You have to look at it as what it was as a standalone single property in 1997, and what they did with the story, what they did with the mandatory characters, the optional characters, and how brilliantly Sephiroth was executed as an antagonist, both Sephiroth and Jenova, which obviously we're not going to dive into here, but the power behind that story is so thought-provoking and so tragic to in my opinion, a Shakespearean level. There is a beauty in every little carefully laid development within these characters and how they connect to each other. It is so intimate and so wonderfully crafted by a team that was willing to take risks, I think is the best way to put it, because Final Fantasy VII was a beautiful risk in that regard, and it holds such a special place for me. From the themes that the main characters to explore, to the secondary characters like Biggs and Wedge and Jesse, and the tragedy that befalls many of these characters, and the wonderful world building of Midgar and Gaia itself, or the planet. It is a can't miss story. It is an essential story to experience as a gamer, because it set the stage for modern Final Fantasy. The stories and the themes and how Square approaches it started right here. It started with a freedom from Nintendo. It started with a freedom from censorship that they had been kind of, in the shadow of for a decade at that time, from 87 to 97. And to see them have that freedom and what they're willing to do with it, this was a team at their height. And it shows. It shows in the quality of the writing. It shows in the quality, and I'd say this, of course, in the perspective of time and history, in the quality of the English translation. Yes, there are slip-ups, there are weird errors, but on the overall, it all works, and it works beautifully. And I am so enamored by it. And again, to this day, and that's why it's so important to me to try to avoid those key spoilers in terms of a review and an analysis. So with that, I would love in the comments for you to share not just your favorite character, but some of your favorite moments. I do highly recommend, if you have not experienced this story, you have to experience it on your own. If you somehow don't know this story, if you've avoided any kind of references, I highly recommend you experience it and potentially avoid the comment section just in case someone's favorite moment is a major spoiler. So thank you all so much. To my patrons, to my legends, thank you for your support and your sponsorship. I truly do appreciate it. And again, you're making this content possible. If you are able, please consider joining us on our Patreon at patreon.com/SandersPresents. That link is available in the description below. Also in the description below is a link to our amazing Discord community, The Tower. And finally, my debut novel, 89 Instrument of Destruction, is available for purchase from Amazon. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this content with your friends. It helps immensely with YouTube's analytics and algorithms. Above all else, and most importantly, stay safe, take care of others, and have a legendary day. Bye, everyone.